Hi, everyone. Welcome to Office Hours. If you're on YouTube and you'd like to join the actual conversation, you can join Zoom by clicking on the little link below. If you're here as an attendee and you've seen all these panelists and you think that you might be able to contribute to the conversation, that you might know something that we don't, you probably do. And we'd love to have you. So you just got to get here early. We open the doors at 6 o'clock. At 6, can't promise anything. There's a lot of wandering conversation around. It's one of my favorite parts, but you have to choose whether it makes sense for you. But you have to be here by 6:40. So 6:40, we start doing mic checks between 6:40 and 6:42. And we'll hand out a Discord link. That's where you can join us to talk about this stuff between the shows. And then at between 6:40 and 6:42, we'll start the actual mic checks. Once we've done the mic checks, the panel has closed for the day. Now, typically after that, at 7 o'clock Pacific Standard Time, we then move to general Q&A. And then at 8 o'clock, we'll have a more vertical discussion about something specific. So Mondays are kind of wild cards, Tuesdays are audio, Wednesdays are video, Thursdays are special guests, Fridays are about event production, and Saturdays are about education. Sundays we just kind of hang out and talk. So those are kind of the process. Today we're going to take another pass, probably not the last pass, but the next pass on audio scopes. We'll talk about audio scopes again today, video scopes again tomorrow. And so those are the kind of what we're working on over the next couple of days. And to note that if you're getting these announcements now, we're starting to put the rest of the week into those announcements, so you can get a sense of what's actually going on. Remember that you are the producers of the show. If you're watching the show, you're the producers of the show. You decide what we're going to talk about when we're going to talk about it, and that's all how you ask the questions and how you vote on them. So ask early. Ask often, vote early, vote often, and it really drives the entire process of what we're doing here. So, Bill, are we ready to jump into the questions?
Yes, let me throw something over into the right mode, and here we go. Philip Tesoro out of Brisbane, Australia says a client wants 7 virtual breakout rooms with up to 400 attendees being able to choose their own breakout. All attendees would have to upgrade to 530 client and no browsers. Only real option is to have 7 separate meetings with no logins. Are there any other options out there to do this? And has a note that was 400 attendees total, not per room.
I mean, this is really a one to ask if you're around, or ask over the weekend when Grant is here, because Grant deals with these kind of multi rooms probably more than anybody else that I know of. But one of the things to think about there is whether if they're going to choose their own location, choose their own adventure is what I wanted to say. The question really is the new Zoom will allow them to go to different, they don't have to necessarily have different Zoom rooms to go to those, to jump into those individual ones. They should be able to choose their own breakout rooms, within that system. And so I'm not sure why they wouldn't be able to choose their own breakouts. So go ahead, Chris.
There's an added feature in the new breakout hopping thing, is that you can also limit it to only be co-hosts that have the ability to change rooms,
Right.
which is kind of useful. And I do know that you have to set it up, beforehand.
Yeah. So people should be able to choose their own breakout rooms right now within one event. The other way to do that would be to use the API and have a web page where they can go to the web page and be taken to a different Zoom room for each one of those. So they wouldn't be doing it inside of Zoom. They would have to go out to a web page, say, okay, I want to go to that one, and be taken into that one. And so I think that would be the other way. And again, I would ask that again over the weekend if you see Grant here. He's the one that really deals with a lot of that automation of that process. I have to admit, one of the reasons that I don't know how to do breakout rooms as well is because I'll say as an aside, I'm not a real big believer in them. I believe in I'm a believer in the idea of breaking everybody in so they can talk amongst themselves and then pulling them back into a unified event. The idea, I think that as we continue to work on these, and we've worked on a lot of virtual events for a long time, is that I'll just keep saying every time someone wants to do lots of different tracks, is that I would always take the tracks and really think about extending my conference out so that people can just choose, when you have 8 tracks, you're basically subdividing everyone into, they only get to see 12% of the show, and will they really come back and watch the record? Probably not. So I think that you're always better to extend your event and have it and let people choose when they come in than to do it. We know we're no longer constrained by time and space. This whole multi-track thing is a vestige of the past that we're trying to keep on, that event teams are trying to maintain. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, I guess I'll just step in for John Nelson here and say Zoomtopia is happening later this week. So I don't know if there's going to be new stuff, but keep an eye out.
Yeah.
Thank you, Mickey.
So yeah, so hopefully we'll keep our eye out to see if anything new. And of course, because we're using Zoom here, and because a lot of us are using Zoom professionally, we'll definitely be talking about whatever happened the day before for the first 15 minutes of the 7 o'clock hours, following the announcements. So we won't quite do it the same way we're doing with the Apple event, because it's longer. But you can expect on Thursday we'll be talking about whatever was announced on Wednesday, and on Friday we'll be talking about whatever was announced on Thursday. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, AV Trainer had shared a meeting with me. It was CMMA, and they made really good use of breakout rooms. New Tech was one of the breakout rooms, and it felt like a trade show. As an attendee cruising around, you get into the lobby. If you didn't have the latest version, she would ask, "Where do you want to go?" And she would push you into that room if you're like on an iOS device, because you didn't have the pop-up to choose. And, there was chatter going on in the lobby, so to speak, the virtual lobby. And there was only a couple people there, but then you can see how many people were in each room. And then you dove in, and it felt like you were virtually hopping from place to place. It was neat. And there was like 20 breakout rooms. So it was a lot of fun.
And what was that for?
I felt like it was this content media professionals or something like that. It was it was a pretty big event for now. I mean, and to get that many people in one meeting, it was neat.
That's cool. Very cool. Next question.
Okay, TJ Asher, normally from the panel today, and comes out of Minneapolis, Minnesota, says, I heard the term 2110 yesterday regarding video. What is 2110?
Go ahead, Jason.
Oh boy, I must have missed a really nerdy discussion in production. 2110 is a SMPTE standard for how to send information over an IP-based network. My guess is you guys got into AES.
We were just talking about NDI actually, and I just said that I'm skipping the NDI part and going from baseband to 2110. Like I'm just 2110 is it's the kind of the big boy version of NDI. It's going to require more infrastructure. It's going to but it is IP based video, and it's done in a SMPTE standard. The NDI was kind of like, we're impatient for waiting for 2110, and it's going to be really heavy and big. So let's do something quickly. And I believe that, and this is my opinion of it. And 2110 is kind of the actual video standard. It's what trucks will get built against. It's what production rooms will get built against. It's like it's taken a lot longer than NDI to come out, but we're starting to see it. The real problem is all the updating everything will still take a long time, which is why I'm still using baseband, just using SDI to move everything around. But when we talk to people who are building new studios and new trucks, anyone who's building from scratch is pretty much, that I know of, is using 2110. Go ahead, Stuart.
I'm just wondering, with reading the 2110 stuff on Wikipedia, it talks about uncompressed video, and that means we'd be able to record uncompressed video. And would that lead to Red jumping up and down with another lawsuit?
I don't think so. I think I don't think Red has. I mean, I think it's being able to record on. I think Red. It's Red RAW, right? Being able to record uncompressed, I don't think is a Red.
Yeah, I think it's compressed RAW is actually what.
Yeah, I don't
what
think
it might be. I'm not 100%.
Yeah, compressed
sure.
RAW. I think it's compressed RAW that is the challenge there that Red has anyway. But I think that uncompressed video over IP, I don't think is. No, it does mean that you have to have a lot of routing. These are big routing challenges to move that much data. So we're talking about some pretty big backbones to make sure that this works. But I have seen bits and pieces of it, and you just know that it's the future. I mean, you see it, and it's much more convenient. What used to be these huge routers or these little, but there are things that are a little scary about them, like patch panels and things like that you're used to that doesn't work quite the same way anymore. So it's going to take a little time. Go ahead, Greg, and then Stuart.
Why was the Red camera black?
Well, it used to.
Because
they never made a red.
Everything in production is black.
You don't want to have red. You don't want to have a red camera on set that would just show up on all the reflections. Go ahead, Stuart.
Yes, with the bandwidth needed, I'm thinking, just because I'm looking at that thing over my shoulder and on the monitor, I was doing a raw test today, and I'm thinking it was Thunderbolt 1. Is there networking via Thunderbolt? Because that would move it.
I mean, really, this is all designed to just work over pretty standard, Ethernet connections. Go ahead, Jason.
It is part of the original Intel spec, but it's never been used as such because the other channels in Thunderbolt are much, much more efficient.
Yeah. So we'll see how it, there's, it's still a little ways away. I think a lot of us will still be using baseband 3 to 5 years, out there for local stuff. Again, I'm experimenting more with NDI in the cloud because it's convenient and it's easy to move around. And I don't know if I would try to do that, but for me, in the room, I'm kind of going to stick with what I've got and then just move to the next standard, most likely. Next question.
Our own Paul Wallace out of Austin, Texas, and here on the panel says mostly a Guy Cochran question. How would you feed good audio to a Facebook Portal Plus?
Is there any way to get external audio into a portal?
I think John might be the better guy to throw this one to. I hooked up my AirPod Pros and didn't get the audio to come through, but John, I think, tried a different Bluetooth.
Yeah, I've tried. You can connect Bluetooth speakers and headsets to the portal, and it works in some of the portal apps. I have not been able to get it to function in the Zoom app. A request has been sent on that.
Yeah, I tried plugging in a couple of USB mics, and they didn't appear in the pop-up as choices for microphones. The only microphones that appear in the portal for me are front and rear, which are the two internal microphones on the portal.
But the good news, it does have a selection for selecting those microphones, so there is something to select what they're using.
Tell the man upstairs or downstairs or wherever he is.
I'll dig around for a Bluetooth mic, see what I can come up with and test it.
Sounds good. Next question.
TJ Asher from here in the panel says, regarding discussion on formatting drives yesterday, what format do you recommend using when formatting a Samsung T5 drive when used on multiple devices? For example, a Mac and a Blackmagic Pocket 6K.
Yeah, go ahead, Jason.
I don't see that as multiple devices. It really is just going to come down to, are you cross-platform or aren't you? If you are, it's exFAT. If you aren't, I have never, ever had a problem with macOS formatting.
The main thing is that I always format with the least flexible device. So if the cameras and the HyperDecks and everything else are the least flexible device, they're the ones that are the most picky about what they have. The Mac can kind of handle whatever it's going to deal with. And so if you're on a Mac, and so I always let them, and to Jason's point, if I'm working with PCs, it's exFAT. If I'm working with a Mac, I use extended. But I have the device, the HyperDeck or the camera, do the formatting for me. And then generally it works perfectly. If I have the Mac do it or I have PC do it, oftentimes I have more anomalies. Go ahead, Jeffrey.
With exFAT, one thing you got to remember is not all devices will accept exFAT. The devices you mentioned definitely will, but if you need to hook it up into other things, you might find some problems. And there is a way to actually do.
I think that's the only two. I think with the cameras, what was suggested here, I think those are the only two options. I don't think you can do anything other than exFAT or so.
Okay, but there is a way to actually do NTFS on a Mac, just so you know.
Oh yeah, absolutely. Next question.
Moving on to Charles Klein out of New York City. Good morning, ladies and gents. Looking for a mesh network for a new space, roughly 3,500 square feet. My room will be hardwired, but need a fast Wi-Fi for guests. We've used Eero, E-E-R-O, in the past, wondering what the panel thinks.
Go ahead, Jason.
The next version of Eero, if you like it and are comfortable with it, will be out. You can pre-order it today on Amazon Prime. And the newer ones are Wi-Fi 6 compliant and, are touting all sorts of extra fancy. I think Eero is a very solid Wi-Fi mesh network.
You just want to manage your expectations of a mesh network. It works. It just doesn't work very well. so you just need to know,
Ethernet.
like,
yeah.
it's not Ethernet. It's definitely not Wi-Fi either. And so if there's any way for you to extend a Wi-Fi, I say this as someone who has a mesh network in their house that will be replacing that sometime this winter, just because I've had it for a couple of years. And the problem is that it's very unstable where the mesh is there. I mean, it's an amplify system, which is generally pretty good from a home perspective, but you're going to end up with a lot more jitter. So if you're trying to stream, you're trying to have concurrent low latency conversations is where it really falls apart. You definitely can, it definitely works, and you can, it's really easy to extend your network, but it doesn't work great. And I don't think it ever will. I mean, I think that after I did more research, after I put it in, I realized that it was just never going to be a great solution. It's just going to be a good solution and an easy solution. Go ahead, Mickey.
Yeah, definitely. I agree with that. If you're building out a new space, might as well run Ethernet, run Cat6a, or if the difference in price in Cat6a and Cat6 is negligible, so just go Cat6a, and set up actual like wired access points as opposed to a mesh network. But if you really have to stick to a mesh network, the Unify access points can actually run on mesh mode. So,
but again, just know that you're just think about, as someone who's experienced it or is still experiencing it at the moment, just think about what you're giving up when you when you use a mesh network. It's not it's an okay solution. It gets you some bandwidth there, but you're going to give up a lot of other things when you go down that path. Next question.
A. Mitchells in Washington says, given all the new exciting features of Zoom, does anyone think there'll be an upgrade to the Chromebook version past v5.0 to use these things, or is it at an end? With the saturation in the education sector of both products, this seems like it should have been a priority.
I don't know. Go ahead, Kev.
I could be wrong, but are they not basically stopping doing these Chromebooks now and going somewhere else, because they seem to be dropping product? I agree, it should have been maintained if they're going to keep it for the education sector.
Google maintain something?
Yeah, exactly.
Sorry.
Headstone in the graveyard.
Go ahead, Jason.
Google has just very recently started giving away, I think it's up to $5,000 in Google Cloud Computing credit to basically harden not only their Java engine, but Firefox and Safari as well, under very good for the net stipulations. I would be shocked if they were to actually get rid of Chrome OS. I think they're just sick of making the hardware. They may very well just license it. Your next one will be Samsung.
Yep. Next question.
TJ Asher out of Minneapolis says, yesterday Alex mentioned his events are all using point-to-point connections in Zoom. How are you doing a group webinar when each panelist has their own point-to-point connection? How does each member of the panel see the panel and interact with each other?
Yeah, so the way we do it, and again, this is an expensive, painful way to do this, but it works. The quality is really high, is that each person goes into our router. They get put into a multi-view. So this is the Blackmagic multi-view 16, the MV16 or whatever. And what that does is it lets us do 16 or 9 or 4, depending on how many people or how many signals we want to send back to them. And we just route into that multi-view what we want to send them. So we want to have a window that's the program. We might want to have playback. We might have their slides. We might have a bunch of other things that are there along with the other panelists. So they all see each other. They see each other going back there. And then we're building a mix minus inside of a QL5 or CL5. It could be a QL1, could be a Behringer. You could do all of those things. It doesn't have to be. We just happen to have a couple CL5s that Brian Maddox runs, and so or Brian has a couple CL5s that we use. So anyway, so but they're all cross. So they're basically seeing and hearing each other through our hardware and through that multi-view. I have dreams of in the future of really building more designed returns for them so that we can put a lot of other things in. There's a couple problems that we have with that. One is that we need to build a super source for everybody. We were looking at vMix for that, and we just didn't. The problem with vMix specifically was that we don't like the vMix caller client side as much as Zoom. It's just harder to use. And so that's number one. Number two is that when a person mutes their video in a point-to-point call on Zoom Rooms, it shows the return feed. It shows what we're sending to them automatically pops into our feed. It is the most annoying thing. Like we just want to have their name pop up, or we want to have it go to, like, I just want to be able to define it and say, go to gray or go to the background image, which is what everything else is just the background image. But for, it's the same thing that happens if you get onto Zoom, you'll just see yourself until somebody else pops in. So it's not something that is specific to Zoom rooms. But if you're trying to use it the way we're using it, it's kind of a disaster. So, we have to tell everybody, like Rain Man, like over and over and over again before a show, never turn off your camera. Never, ever, never turn off your camera because otherwise you get, and so every once in a while we've seen a flash where you see, someone does that. And before we cut away, you see this big return go back of what we sent them. What we don't want to do is send them notes or other things, their talking points or other things like that, because we're afraid that it'll show up in the stream. So, and we've had like a second or half a second of that happen over, 100 hours of content, but it's still something that we worry about. So those are the things that return signal is the big reason we don't do anything more than just the multi-views. Go ahead, Chris.
I was going to say that I've been working with a sales rep from Zoom upgrading our Slice accounts. And he said that I was asking him about how busy he was because of Zoomtopia. And he said that although he wasn't busy, that they had received some previews of what was coming up. And he said, it's really exciting.
Yeah, I think it's going to be, I think that I'll sit here and talk about the things I don't like about Zoom and the Zoom, little things, that little icon that shows up on my Zoom return and the return problems and bits and bots, but Zoom is light years ahead of everybody else. And I feel like this week they'll just pull further away. I don't think that the other platforms are going to compete anytime soon. Go ahead, Courtney.
Just on that rabbit hole, is Zoomtopia closed now? Because some people said in the chat that they couldn't log in now. And can you watch it without logging in as a participant, like on YouTube, or is it streamed live somewhere where you're not participating? Just to view.
I don't know.
I think you can still register. I'll have to check. I know they're going to be, the videos will be available. I'm not sure if they're streaming at the same time.
Cool. All right, Victor.
It just says that registration is closed, unfortunately.
Okay, there you go.
Closed it. Oh, that's
interesting.
News to me.
Interesting move. Exclusive, but you'll get it later. All right, next question.
Peter Rosato in Las Vegas is assisting with a screen scrape of a news website live stream. They want to go full screen, and after about 20 minutes, it pops back out of full screen to the full website. Any thoughts on what it may be or how to prevent that?
Go ahead, Jason.
My guess is that it's a JavaScript thing just designed to save bandwidth for the news affiliate. There are any number of ways to get around that. Alex, what do you think would be the most efficient? I mean, one way to do it would just be, AdBlock Plus and just go through, and if anyone knows code, they should be able to just, surgically disable it.
The thing that would probably make it the easiest for you is what's called a region of interest. So there's a region of interest. ROI is a black or AJA little box that will let you pick what part of the screen you want to output. So you can go out to that and then just draw, this is what I want, and have it output. And that would take you away from needing full screen. I think that would be probably one thing to think about. Go ahead, Stuart.
The software equivalent to that would be to download a copy of vMix and use the NDI desktop capture, which will actually give you a window or an input into vMix or any NDI receiver from each open window you've got. So you could choose one particular window.
Yep. Jason, and then Beju.
And if you have a broadcast card, specifically a Blackmagic broadcast card, SDI Scan Converter is, in my experience, an extremely stable app that will allow you to output an entire desktop or just a selection, just like, screen cap, and output it on any one of your feeds.
That's great. Go ahead, Beju.
Yeah, just adding on to Stuart's point, and desktop capture from vMix is actually free. It's a free app. You don't need the full vMix app for it. And it outputs NDI streams of all the different sources it can see on your system. So it's much more flexible than NDI's own scan converter. and you can use it internally on your system, either in Mimo Live, like I use it with Mimo. It really works really nicely on the Mac. It actually works much better than anything else. So it's a really nice app to use, and it's flexible.
That's great. Yeah. Next question.
And
go ahead,
the
Victor, real
panel-
quick. Victor, real quick.
Okay, real quick. The series of siphon tools as well. I'll put a link up. You can siphon, which it's not just a screen scrape. It's taking an exact replication of whatever is on your screen in memory and putting it out. So then you can actually see it move or whatever. It's Lawrence, I'm sure we'll talk about it when he does his talk. It's amazing.
Next question.
The panel's own Greg Kurta from the unpronounceable town in Norway says, okay, boneheaded question. I have some video interviews embedded in a, Alex, don't yell, PowerPoint, which play fine until I share in Zoom. Is this just the way it is?
There's two things. One thing is videos will never play fine out of PowerPoint. Anyway, so they don't play that well out of Keynote either, to be fair. I mean, they play okay out of Keynote, but anytime you really want to do real playback, you just want to get it out of the presentation tools, whether it's Keynote or PowerPoint or whatever. But the problem that you're having probably is when are you sharing doing a screen share, Greg? So the screen share is always going to make a decision about frame rate versus resolution. And so what it's going to say is, well, you want a high resolution, I'm going to give you a low frame rate. Now you can hit optimize for video when you do the screen cap thing, and it will improve it a little bit, but it does not improve it all the way. So it's
about 12 frames a second.
Yeah. So it's going to be better, but not great. The best way to do it is to have to use some tool, whether it's one of these screen capture ones that we were talking about, or have another computer. And basically what you want to do is you want to pipe it in as a camera, whether it's using some kind of NDI tool or something else that you pipe it in so it looks to Zoom like a camera. Now, what it will do is it will lower the resolution of your image, but it'll play it back at the high frame rate. So if you just got to decide with Zoom, you're always deciding whether you want to choose between resolution or frame rate. So frame rate becomes important, and you just got to decide what's on your slides and what's in the video. I find that for most videos, the frame rate's more important. Like I would rather have it just show up as video to Zoom and have it just output that way. But you have to find some way to grab onto that video and play it out, whether it's OBS or Mimo Live or Wirecast or whatever you're doing. But you play it out as a virtual camera into it. But however you get it out of the video out, you want it to show up like it's a web camera to Zoom, and then Zoom will lower its resolution but maintain its frame rate. Does that make sense?
Yeah, kind of. I'll try. I'm trying to avoid a lengthy chain so that I can stay stable.
Right.
You know.
Yeah. It's
I
guess as soon as you screen capture,
it's not till Friday, so I got a couple of days.
Yep. Mickey.
Yeah, I'm just curious. Sorry, I'm just curious because I know previously, Greg, you got it running on OBS. Why the shift?
The conference has requested that we don't use third-party things so that people don't have to pin the screen, and because when you share, it just goes full screen on everybody, and that's kind of what they like. Do we have time? Can I just try it? Can I just play it for you? I have it set up.
Do you need co-host?
Yeah, remember you're streaming on YouTube. If there's any copyrighted material, watch out.
Oh, yeah. Okay, never mind. Thank you, Courtney. Yeah, I don't know. I guess I'll just keep playing with it and see if I can figure out something.
Go ahead, Chris. Looks like Alex is distracted.
Go ahead, Chris.
Oh.
Yeah, I was going to say, Greg, pinning is a local solution, but spotlighting takes over for everybody. Can you spotlight the video instead of pin it? Can there be a host that kind of runs that when he sees the video, he spotlights it?
It's possible. I may have to. I don't know who the session share is, so I'll try to find out.
It may be that the solution for smooth playback is having somebody manage it in that way. But a spotlight would spotlighting for everyone sends it to everybody.
Yeah, I mean, I think that the only way to get frame rate is to show up at a camera. So that'll be the thing that you have to kind of figure out. Anyway, next question.
Hey, Mitchell's is back in with a philosophical question. If 10 milliseconds in audio delay is still considered invisible, what does everyone feel is truly the beginning of unacceptable? If you're stuck with just frame adjustments for audio delay, so 33 milliseconds or 17 milliseconds per frame, whether you're working in 30 or 60 frames per second, at what point are you left with good enough?
Go ahead, Greg, and then Mickey.
My view is that your average viewer can't see the difference plus or minus 1 frame. 2 frames, yes. Plus or minus 1 frame, no.
I'd say plus or minus 2 for the most
Greg,
part, and
you're
maybe
talking
5.
about. Sorry, I assume, Greg, you're talking about 24 frames per second.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Sorry.
Yeah, just to clarify, because I think most of the people in the group work at 30, I think.
But either way, I would say that 1 or 2 frames. I mean, I find that a lot of people have a hard time identifying it less than 2 frames. If you do it a lot, you get pretty good at it, and you're plus or minus a frame. But especially with web video, people are now watching so much Zoom and so much other stuff that is varying by 3 or 4 frames at a time. That people's whether they notice it or not, whether they care, I think that it can go up and down by at least 3 frames before we get a lot of complaints. Now we try to hammer it right down to the last bit, but I will say that anybody who says they think that the audio is off by 15 milliseconds, if you say that in a production, everyone just rolls their eyes. They're like, you can't see that. Like you can't, like they're just like, okay, all right. Mickey, and then Jason, and then Courtney.
Yeah, I think most layman people, like non-production people, would start noticing things at 18 milliseconds, and definitely everyone will see it at 150. 80.
Oh, 80. Yeah. No, I was like 18. So 80. Yeah, 80 milliseconds. I think you're right.
Yeah,
That's
people will start
right.
seeing it, but 150. Yeah, like my mom will notice that. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Jason, and then Courtney.
I mean, it's also worth mentioning that YouTube is never in sync when you're doing it live. I mean, if you watch it, the sync will vary. It just does this unless they fixed it since I last looked.
No, here's why YouTube does that, and here's why Zoom does that, and everything else is that it maintains our audio. So what we can't, as a viewer, what we can't handle is clicking and jumping in our audio. People will just stop watching. So the audio stays constant all the time, and it's a lot less bandwidth, so it's easy to keep it constant. The problem is that YouTube and Zoom and everybody else drops frames. So they're dropping frames all the time and trying to get that all back together while the audio stays constant. So what's happening is the frames are disappearing and the audio is still doing its thing. And so it's going back and forth as it is constantly maintaining the frame rate, which is the frame rate is varying by 28 to 32 or 28 to 30. It's kind of doing this thing where it's trying to keep all those frames going in. The audio is constant. And so what we think of is it dropping in and out of sync. And I had a lot of conversations with some engineers about this, and they were like, you can't. I was like, why are you sending the video and audio in 2 different streams? And they're like, you have to, because if you lost frames and lost the audio with those frames, people would stop watching. And that's what we, because they'll hear clicking and they'll hear things and they'll drive them crazy. And so the audio is the priority on these platforms, and that's why videos constantly dropping in and out of sync, in those platforms. Now, one thing to know is that not only is it varying back and forth, but YouTube is off when live is off by 1 frame. We've measured this a lot. So
I understand that. The reason I brought that up is because I would laugh at someone who'd be like, yeah, you're exactly 15 off. It's like, are you trying to be like one of these people who pretends they have perfect pitch? Like, what is the point?
The thing is that our measurement is YouTube varies by about 45 milliseconds. Up at plus or minus 45 milliseconds is just bouncing.
Yeah, and it's a feature, not a bug. That's my point.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And so that's why it varies. But we do find that YouTube is off by 30 milliseconds all the time. And so it's 1 frame. It's off, or 33, but it's 1 frame off in the live stream for whatever reason. We don't understand. when you watch the VOD later, it's on. So there's something about the process of live streaming that it's behind. The audio is ahead. And so what the problem you get into is if you sync the audio to the live stream, your video will actually be ahead in the record. Like if you sync it in your encoders, the video will be ahead in the record. And it's a really subtle thing. And no one notices if you do that. It's okay, because we figured out that we had a lot of conversations internally about this, but why it's okay for the video to be a little ahead. The video can be ahead by 1 or 2 frames and it doesn't bother people at all. Get it behind, if the video is behind the audio, it bothers people a lot. And so if we error, we always error with the video being just a frame or 2 ahead of the audio. And our theory is it's because light moves faster than sound. And so when we see someone talk 20 feet away or 30 feet away, their video is actually getting to us faster than their audio. And so our brain just corrects for that. Like it got 1 million years of processing development to process video coming in front of the audio. It doesn't bother us at all. But when the audio goes in front of the video, that usually means you ate something bad. so the brain is like, that doesn't, I shouldn't do that. That's why, anyway, so it's a different process for the brain to manage. Anyway, go ahead, Courtney, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, that was one of the things I was going to mention. The reason the drift occurs, and it's been the bane of broadcasters ever since they came up with compression, is that most of these streaming formats are variable bit compression. So it depends on what's in the frame, takes how long, determines how long it takes to compress it and how much data it's going to take up as it sends down the pipe. So it's a constant moving target, and they set themselves at an average frame rate. And that's what the audio, when it's rendered, it uses the average frame rate to sync up the audio with the video. And so that's what causes the rubbery sync. It'll go back and forth, bouncing around the average, but it'll never be exactly on. And I agree, 2 frames to 3 frames, most people will accept it. And you're right. They did a lot of studies about the psychological effect of missync, and audio before video is much more discordant than audio after video.
There's certain people also. We were watching I was doing a sync test over the weekend. Not a sync test, but we were using some footage. And there's some people that you just they move their lips so well. As when you're dealing with sync all the time, you're like, I wish I could just have that person do my sync tests all the time, because their lips separate really nicely when they're talking, and it's just super easy to find. And then you have other people that go up there and do sync tests. They don't move their mouth enough, and you can't figure out. It doesn't mean anything, So it's a funny thing. All right, next question.
So Gregory Wheeler from Ellicott City, Maryland says, Alex, are you still testing vMix for your productions?
We're not testing it currently. We started going down a path with vMix Call. We weren't really testing it to use vMix as the whole platform. We were using it as the remote caller system. And fundamentally, the issue we got into was that the web browser-based WebRTC solution for consumers was too complicated for us. Not that you couldn't have other people do it, like you can go into the browser and you choose which camera you're using and you choose which mic and everything else. But that was not a process that we wanted to try to, we're processing tens of people a week, so we don't like it. So we look at it through this machine of like, how much time is it going to take us to figure out how to tell people how to use their Chrome browser to choose the right camera and to do the thing. And so from a production pipeline system, the issue that also happened is that everybody knows how to use Zoom. So a big thing is that if we just choose Zoom, we eliminate huge pieces of our explanation process. Even it's one of the big things with Skype. Skype was really hard because no one has it installed anymore. We have to get them to install it. And so it was Zoom. Everybody has Zoom. Everybody knows how to use it. They know where the mute button is. They know where all the bits and pieces are. And so it reduced our, it flattened the curve, so to speak, for us to use Zoom for that. And when we found out that with Rooms, we could get almost a clean aperture out, it was good enough for what we were doing. Is it perfect? No, absolutely not. And we would love to see vMix do it. But what we would need from vMix is an application, Mac and PC, that sits on the other side that is going to do all the input selection. Input and output selection is what's missing. Using the web browser to do that is, FUBAR, for real production. If you're doing a lot of them, if you're doing one of them at a time, it's fine. But when you have 10 people, you have to get ready in the next half hour. That is not a workable solution for us. And so that's why we stopped using vMix, is when we kind of got down that path and we started having trouble with the first couple. We were just like, oh, this isn't going to work. So I think it has a huge advantage that we could send back custom return frames and everything else that I'm excited about, but it's not going to turn the corner right now. Next question.
Rupert McRae from Dallas, Texas says, with several members of the panel now having experimented with the MOKOSE HDMI camera, has anyone used any successful add-on lens combinations with or without adapters and so forth?
We would ask Chris Fenwick, but it appears that Chris is in a different show. Go ahead, Paul.
Yeah, I RMA'd my MOKOSE because it was just, I didn't like the configuration of where they had the HDMI on the side, and it was just clunky to me. Yeah, but I did like the fact that they have a tripod connector on the top and the bottom both. But I had fun with it for a day or two.
Right. Go ahead, Jason.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you have enough cameras. I in turn absolutely adore this camera. This little guy is just, it was what, $163? It's just a 4K camera. It's a little bit finicky to actually crank down and get the focus right. But once you do, I think it's a spectacular camera. As to the question, no, I haven't added anything to the lens, but it is a standardized lens, so I can't imagine.
Are you using Are you using the camera right now? Is that what we're looking at?
No, this is the Cinema 4K, or I'm sorry, the Studio 4K.
Right. Good, Stuart.
I'd like to point out that when you go to Amazon now, the variable focus zoom lens version of the MOKOSE C100 is no longer available. They have sold out, but they still have the fixed lens version. I would suggest looking at some of the Cosmica prime lenses to give a go on that, because they are C and CS mount, and they're basically a Pentax lens, so they're really great transmission.
Go ahead, Courtney, and then John.
Yeah, I'm using that camera right now, and I agree. The kit lens that used to come with it, the variable focal length lens, is very confusing. You change the focal length, and you got to change the focus. You change the focus, and then you got to change the focal length, and they ping pong back and forth to get it in focus, and it's just microscopic adjustments on that lens.
Is that a back focus issue?
Yeah, I think it is. I think the back. Really a back focus, and not really a zoom. It just changes the.
Well, so for folks who don't know what a back focus issue is, so when you're putting a PL lens like onto a or any kind of large lens on one, and you're constantly changing those, there's the front focus, but there's the back focus, and the problem that you get into is the back focus has to be very precise. Otherwise, as you change your zoom setting, you're going to change your focus. And so that back focus, and so typically what we do is we put a lens on, and we set a focus point at a very specific distance. We usually make it a 10 feet for us, and you set the camera at 10 feet. So you set the focus like this is 10 feet, and then the back ring, the little back focus, you focus it up, and then you lock that, and then you start to zoom in and out and make sure that it's in focus all the way through, and sometimes make some minor corrections. But if you don't do that, these lenses are off. And it sounds like if you're changing zoom and it's changing focus, then typically that is back focus chart there. Typically the issue that you have is back focus.
That has not been my experience. I think it's just a tiny little lens.
Okay. Go ahead, Stuart.
It's a very focal lens. It'll always change focus as you zoom. It's the same
right.
as
It doesn't. Good lenses adjust just the back focus as you zooms because they have internal moving elements, and this one doesn't have those.
It's not. I got it. Okay. All right. Next question.
Eric Hall of Mount Vernon, Washington says, regarding the BBC performance shared earlier, I wonder how the distanced singers could hear each other.
What was the BBC performance?
Alex,
did I miss that?
Alex, when we were talking about orchestras, I popped in a piece of a socially distanced proms from this year as an example to see how they positioned an orchestra with its singers. They just used the hall's auditorium.
And did they actually, were the singers all in the same room?
Oh yeah,
or
they were physically all there, but socially distanced.
Oh,
The
right.
clips in the show. It's
Okay.
just so you could see how they can achieve it even in a real world venue, but no audience, and yet get the voices together. And yeah, I don't know the answer to this specific question of how it was managed, and I have been looking around. I might get back to you on that one. Someone I can sing a message to get an answer to that.
Sounds good. Next question.
Moving on to James Babbitt. For LED lights, which specs are important for accurate color rendering? And I can do that if nobody else wants
Go ahead, Bill.
Well, in the last 10 years or so, there's a new kind of a standard that's developed called CRI, or Color Rendering Index. And if you're trying to figure out whether the camera is engineered to a high level, you want to look at that spec if they provide it and get it as high as possible. If you get down into the 70s and 80s, it's not very accurate. As you get closer to 100, it gets more and more accurate. Usually with most cameras, 95 or so is the best you're going to do, unless you're spending a lot of money.
Anyone else? Okay, there you go. Next question.
All right, next question. Eric Call says, I'm a singer. My interest is to revive choral performance in opera. How best can I help to develop amateur video engineers in my region with a passion for classical performance? Note, I'm talking live performance, such as the Last Night of the Proms 2020 recent BBC broadcast. Is there a way to, oh, no, then he asks if there's a way to edit a question after submitting.
Sorry. One of the things to think about is not necessarily having someone have passion for, it's not really trying to attract people to have passion for the subject matter. It's passion for their craft, is what you're trying to get people attached to. And even if they're like, for instance, I know this will sound crazy, but for our shows, for a lot of the high profile shows, we actually try to find people who have no passion for the content. Like we act like we had one where we had a basketball star and we had somebody that was really into basketball, and the one person that wasn't going to be on that team was that person, and the reason for that is they get distracted by the content. And so we actually want people to not be distracted by the content and only be thinking about what they're trying to do. And so we, with teams, a lot of times we're trying to separate passion and content as much as we possibly can. And so you're going to still be excited about some of these, but it can change the way you approach it. You're thinking about the content, not what you're doing. And so in this case, what you're looking for, in my opinion, are people who are just trying to, they're trying to get better at their craft, and you have to find something that's big enough that they want to be part of. I think a lot of times when I'm trying to find people who want to play a bigger game, it's not asking them to do something hard is much easier than asking them to do something easy. Like if they think that, so people want to be challenged. They want to work on something that's bigger, and more exciting. Getting them to spend their Saturday afternoon working on something that you're not asking them to do very much is actually kind of it's not as rewarding for them. And so I know it seems opposite, but you want to ask for bigger things. So what you have to think about is, what would they be excited about? What's the possibility that you want to create for what they're doing? And I've said this equation over and over again, is that action always occurs when possibility is greater than circumstance. Their circumstance is all the other things that they have to do, whatever that is, and their possibility is whatever you create. So what big picture are you trying to create and get them excited about, of what could be possible for them? And that might be personal development, or it could be something that you're creating, but it has to be bigger than whatever their circumstances are. If it's sitting around watching football games, then it's a small circumstance. If it's other work, it's a large circumstance. And so you have to figure out what that is. Go ahead, Jeffrey, and then Jason.
You could go with the Bugs Bunny approach, and I'm not saying that you need to make animated instances and
I think that's absolutely
and
necessary.
do video things like that, but you still have things like Seth MacFarlane, who even in his regular productions is putting operatic and putting in big orchestral pieces into the thing. So that might be the best way to approach it, is just look at it how they're doing it.
Yeah, I mean, and people are trying to build demo reels and do a lot of other things. It's just a matter of trying to figure out what's going to turn that corner for them. Jason?
Yeah, I think it's really, really specific to your region. And I find that if I don't believe what I'm saying, I'm not very convincing. So, really igniting passion in other people is at least for me, simply a matter of believing what I say and and then just telling everyone who will listen.
And trying to
The reason I wanted to mention that a CRI of 100 is the sun, and anything above 95 is an incandescent light. So that's why the CRI matters.
go ahead. That's good, Kev. Your sync is perfect. There we go.
I was just thinking that it might be worthwhile putting out a call out locally for audio engineers who fancy a challenge, and see if anybody comes to that.
Well,
Because as Alex said, if you want the craft person, they won't be less bothered about what it is you're trying to achieve as a creative enterprise, but they may well embrace the opportunity to try and deal with that, given your circumstances.
Yeah, so it's just trying. That gets back into building a community. Like I'll tell you, that's hard to say. Like, how would I do that next week? But building a community of people working on things together is a key piece of the puzzle, of building that out, and figuring out ways that you either empower the community that you're already in. There might be people in your area that are already user groups and things like that, or starting to build that up. But finding other people that are, a big piece of that is finding other people that are interested in the same thing that you are, which is what we're doing on a larger scale here, or medium scale here on office hours. Is we're collecting a bunch of people that are interested in a similar thing, and a lot of us are slowly interconnecting with each other and figuring out how to do stuff together, because we're getting to know each other. And that's what you want to do on a micro level at your own location. Go ahead, Courtney.
Yeah, and it doesn't necessarily have to be, you can find metalhead musicians that have a meticulous nature and really get into, the specifics. And if with enough rehearsal, they'll start picking out stuff, to focus on and accentuate, and they might, attack it on just a technical level, whether they like the music or not. And that's what I do. If I have to work on something that, is not really my passion, I'll just attack it on a technical level, and I'll just try and make it the best technical performance I can by paying attention and focusing on it. And you can do that with any genre of music or any type of artistic endeavor. So I would go that route, and you may eventually, turn them on to an appreciation of opera.
Yeah. Next question.
James Babbitt here in San Diego says, I watch Tiny World on my iPad Pro, and I'd like to use larger speakers and a screen. Any advice on the equipment and connections required for playing Dolby Atmos at home? And
where's TJ Asher when we need him? Like, TJ is the one that is really into this. The first thing to know is that you can the easiest way to do that is with these. So you can now, with iOS 14, you can use the iPad Pro, or I'm sorry, the iPods or AirPods Pro. Will give you actually a pretty good, not perfect representation, but a pretty good representation of surround. I don't feel like I get overhead, but I get around. It feels very much around. As far as the next step up from there is sound bars. There's a lot of sound bars that you can get that are actually pretty good at reflecting audio. And I'm kind of amazed at what sound bars can do. You listen to them and you're like, that doesn't make any sense. Like, I don't know why that is working. So, the sound bar is the next step up from that. And there's a lot of different people who are making those sound bars. And then after that, you're looking for an AV receiver, so that I think the one we have that we're testing with in the office is a Denon. I think it might have cost us $1,000. So it was an expensive one, but it does. So you're going to use an AVR or an AV receiver that you're going to now put in speakers. And typically, to truly get an Atmos mix, you're going to start with 10 speakers. Is kind of the you have. So the 10 speakers is kind of the minimum for really doing Atmos at that point, but you can add as many speakers as you want. So that's the power of Atmos, is that it's not based on speakers. It's based on, object location within a 3D space. And so the more speakers you add, the more resolution you get into where that is, but it's not, you can keep on going from there. So it's a fascinating, but you need at least 10. And so you're probably looking at, if you have relatively good quality speakers, you're probably looking at an investment starting at about, for the AVR solution, is probably my guess is the AirPod Pros are about $250. I think that's the number. The sound bars are in the $500 range. You know, they started in the $500 range, I think. And then I think an AVR with relatively good speakers, okay speakers, not incredible speakers, you're probably looking at $3,500 to $5,000 with the receiver and the cables and the mounts and everything else. You're probably in the $3,500 to $5,000 range to get into an Atmos, discrete system. So and so that's probably your price ranges as you go through it, and it's a pretty good experience. I'm trying to persuade my wife that it's all the money we're saving by not going to the movies, we could upgrade. I have a 7.1 system that came with the house, so I already have some surround, and it's hard to tell her that I just need 4 more speakers up on the roof and a new receiver. Go ahead, Courtney.
So maybe you can answer this question because I don't live in the Apple world that much. If you're doing AirPlay to a big screen, does it carry the Dolby Atmos with it, or is it latch onto a local stream?
I think it actually. I think it will actually. I think it'll take it with it, but I'm not 100% sure. Go ahead, Jason.
AirPlay 2 is capable of that, yes.
And I just noticed also the new Chromecast that they just announced for $49 does support Atmos, and it does support HDR and all the Dolby formats. So
that's great. Yeah, and it's just a matter of having a receiver that can do something with it. Is the key to the operation. But it's pretty nifty. Go ahead, Jeffrey, real quick, and then we'll move on.
So I've done reviews of sound bars, and the one thing that two things that they always tell you to do is, one, figure it as a dome. You're creating a small little area where you're going to be in, where your couch is going to be, your chair is going to be. So if you have a big room, you want to make it a small little dome for that. And then, of course, the second thing is to make sure that you are pretty much opposite of the TV. Don't have chairs at angles, and be straight onto the TV so you get that full optimal experience.
Next question.
Dan Hubert from Erie, Pennsylvania says, you mentioned sending video sources as a camera source into Zoom. How is the audio from those video sources seen then? As a microphone?
It can be, yeah. So it just depends on what you're sending it in. So, like if you're sending Memo live, you can say Memo is the camera and the microphone. And then the audio is coming in from those two. So you just have a matter of deciding that input that's being provided, if you want it to be, it can be the mic input as well. Then you have to remember that then your mic has to go through that system as well. Or if you're just doing screen share, of course, you can just say computer audio. But if you're doing it as a camera source, you can do that. Go ahead, Guy.
Yeah, I'm learning this as well, just to kind of eat my own dog food and fail. I'm going through vMix. I learned yesterday how to do all the hooks and get NDI embedded. So camera is coming in through just a capture card, and then the audio is coming in through the mix pre. The mix pre is then married into that NDI signal on the way out, and then I'm using the NDI Tools virtual camera. And so in Zoom, it shows up as NDI input, and then the audio is NDI input as well. And that way the sync should be as close as I can get it married together. Otherwise, yesterday when I tried just selecting the mix pre as its own microphone input into Zoom, it was wildly off because, of course, there's so much software in that chain going on. So it's just a learning experience, and it depends on if you're doing OBS, Memo Live, vMix, how you're throwing those two together. But ideally, you get them married together somewhere so that they're tight, as tight as you can get it. I'm still off a few frames.
All right. Next question.
Hey, Mitchell, this one's a little complex. So if 2 frames is an acceptable level of delay, or as Mickey says, 80 milliseconds, then why do people stress out about the 19 to 20 milliseconds, okay, sometimes 40 milliseconds of transmit latency for DECT, DECT microphones versus the more standard TV band wireless mics, or even Bluetooth's often 10 to 40 milliseconds adjustment? He has a note, this is just a complaint related to transmit delay, not the other issues of quality or compander circuits, although feel free to expand on those if you like.
Well, go ahead, Courtney. I think I know where you're going to go with this.
Yeah, well, the problem comes when you're mixing them with non-transmitted microphones or compressed microphones.
Or
Like
you're
if
in
you
a
got
room.
Boom, if you're in a room with delay of bouncing off the walls. The mic, if you've got a boom mic, let's say on one channel and one of these wireless mics on a second channel with that number of delay, if you mix them two together, you get all kinds of phase cancellation and echo problems. So usually you'll align the two. You'll set the boom up and then you'll align the one that has a digital transmission to delay to match the or delay. No, you delay the boom to match the wireless delay. So that they line up, and that way you can crossfade between them or mix them together and not deal with cancellation issues, comb filtering.
All right, Mickey?
Yeah. Aside from the phase issues, I mean, if you find yourself in a situation where someone needs to monitor it live, people start to hear the delay starting at 6 milliseconds, and it becomes totally distracting at 10 milliseconds and up. So, for example, if you're singing and then you have to monitor yourself as well, or if you have a wedge pointing at you, like uh, even at 6 milliseconds, you're gonna start to struggle. And of course, like, if as engineers are also there trying to accurately capture what's going on, and if there's a delay in the chain, we aim to, you know, keep it as pristine, as true as possible, and the delay will affect
Definitely the
that.
delay that we were talking about for live streaming. There's all kinds of things that are acceptable in that area, but when you're talking about live and actual in the room delay, that is super sensitive to very, very small changes. Go ahead, Victor.
Yeah, I know when I record, I look for interfaces with sub 1 second, delay.
Or sub 1 millisecond, or what?
I'm
Sub
sorry,
1 second.
1 millisecond. And
Oh yeah, I
most
was
of
like
them,
sub 1 second. They can all do that.
Sorry,
Yes,
most
that
of
SRT.
the high-end ones, like the ones that I use for recording music, are Universal Audio's Apollos, and those are just superb. It's almost real time, because Mickey's right. You just can't take it past 6 milliseconds. You're like, I can't deal with it.
Next question.
Alex Jacobs says, looking into live captioning and translation of events, most encoders can only handle stereo audio. Encoders to look at that can handle multiple channels of audio. True or false?
So I think we're talking about a couple of different things: live captioning and translation, or interpretation. So I do want to distinguish, and we're going to go a little heavy, and then we'll go into our audio discussion here. But we got a couple of questions. We'll finish up. So live. I just want to make, when we talk about translation, it's interpretation. So translation is something you do with text not in real time. Interpretation is what you do in real time. So you always want to kind of think about that when you're talking to somebody in the industry. You're talking live interpretation, but not live translation. You have an ASL interpreter, you have a French interpreter, but you don't have translators. Translators are things that work on it in post. Interpreters are what they work on it in real time. When we talk about that, what we typically are doing with encoding is we are going to only tend to deliver, stereo channels or mono channels to the listener, but we can pack up to 16 channels onto an SDI feed. So, and then if you start using Dante, you can do a whole bunch of other things that are more complex. But typically into our encoders, we can do that. Now, different encoders work differently. The lower end encoders will handle stereo, as you pointed out. They can see 2 channels, and that's all they can see when they're encoding. The link, for instance, Amazon's link does 8 channels. Turns out it's the bottom 8, as we found. So you can do 8 channels with that, and then larger encoders like Elementals can do 16, can see all 16 channels coming in. You then grab onto, you don't encode all of those channels when you encode out at one time. You have the encoder look at it and say, I'm going to send these first 2 channels out as English. The next one is French. The next one is Russian. The next one is, and typically when you're doing interpretation, you'll end up getting mono tracks and then putting them in. Now, that interpretation, how that interpretation mix gets created, is oftentimes done in your mixer, and you're going to decide. There's a whole bunch of different ways to do that interpretation. You can do ducking, which is a lot of times what you do is you try to set it up so that there's a little bit of a slow attack. So you kind of hear the person start talking, and then the interpretation comes in underneath it. And as they start talking, what you usually do is want to use something like Dugan to kind of push theirs back as the interpreter talks, and then it just kind of rolls over the top of it as they're talking. And that's the best way to do it, in my opinion, is Dugan. You can also just attenuate the channel based on the volume of another channel, but that's kind of what Dugan's doing and does it pretty well there. So anyway, so you push that down. Now you can also do the more complex one. If you have two people talking to each other, is a crossfade, which is essentially you're pushing English down when the French, or let's say the Indian person is talking, and then Indian down when the, so you're going both directions as you do that. That way you can send a single feed out for both audiences, and but then instead of having the interpretation on the top of the loudest thing, it's kind of like a whisper in the background, so you can hear it. And so you have the raw feed, and then you have this kind of whispering that goes on in either language. And so there's a lot of different ways of kind of mixing that. Most of that work's done in the mixer, not in the encoder. so that you're doing that all in the mixer and not in the encoder, and then you're delivering those in multiple tracks. Now, if you're going to have an encoder, you'll split those all out. If you're doing transmission to broadcast, you have to be very careful of how you're defining those for the broadcast. So you'll say, hey, I'm putting up on the satellite 4 channels or 8 channels or 6 channels of audio, and in their breakout of what you're sending them, you're telling them these channels are all of these things, and some broadcasters can handle that and some can't. So you have to decide the first two. Don't ever have the first 2 channels be something different. There's people cheat and they want to have one language on one channel and another language on the channel 2. The first 2 always have to be the main channel out. Otherwise, you'll have broadcasters who can't handle that, and they can't remap. And if they can't remap, you'll just end up with craziness. So anyway, that's a very long answer to something I have to deal with a lot. So anyway, but those are different ways to think about that. Next question.
Well,